Yes, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Caleb Belmore. Larry Gross. How are you? Robert Belmore. I'm doing well. Nice to meet you.
Here you go. Thank you. Vince. Hi. Nice to meet you. Jenny. Here you go.
Hi, Vince, I'm Larry.
Hi, Larry.
Thank you. That's them.
I'm Vince.
Mr. Belmore.
All right.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
Thank you.
There's more.
Okay. Good.
All right, let's get started. Good morning.
Good morning.
Intermodal chaos. Behind me, you'll see a picture of the Port of Long Beach and lots of ships waiting to be docked. Today, the things we're going to show you will prevent this happening in the future. Good morning, everybody. We're here at the University of Arkansas. Today I have Vince, Paxton, and Caitlin, and we're excited to show you what we found. Today we're going to go through a brief overview, a breakdown, some other factors. We're going to look at 2017 and beyond, and then have some discussion. So we're going to start with what we found to be our solutions. Moving forward for the intermodal industry, we believe technology adoption, network velocity, and partnerships are going to be increasingly important. But before we get to that, we're going to walk through imports, regional growth, 2016 trends, and some other factors that we believe influences all of this. I'm going to pass off to Paxton for this data.
Yep, thank you, Jared. So I'm going to be talking some about the imports, the import-export ratio, some trends that I've seen, and some regional topics. The first chart you see is the total imports and total exports from 2017 to 2016. The notable features of it are the 2008 financial crisis. You can see in 2009 we have a substantial increase that's continuing today in imports, and then a leveling off in 2013 of exports followed by a decrease. For this presentation we focus primarily on imports, but to summarize some of the findings on exports, the ports of New York, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Seattle, and Portland all suffered declines in 2016 from 2015 in exports. The largest of which, I'm sure you know about Portland, the ILWU, essentially drove out some of the major customers in the container market of Portland due to the renegotiations of contracts with the Port Authority. And what happened in Portland is very indicative of what has been happening on the West Coast in the past few years. This is the import-export ratio from 2007 to 2016. It can be read in 2007, we imported 1.6 times as many containers as we exported. And you can see there's a big dip from the financial crisis, and we have just now come back to levels before. This is the top 10 ports by monthly volume average between 2007 and 2015. The method here is to really highlight the distinction in the next chart of what happened in 2016. So we have the major players, New York, Long Beach, and Los Angeles, and some of the smaller ports in other regions, like in the north and the south and the southeast. That orange line is a growth percentage line. So the three big players are growing at a much slower rate than ports in the northeast, western Canada, and in the southeast. However, New York is the largest growth percentage than Los Angeles and Long Beach, and we're pointing to the northeast because of its location there. To summarize some of the findings, the regions that we're going to focus on the most is Western Canada, the Northeast, and the Southeast. Those are their growth percentages in 2016. And now I'm going to hand it off to Vince to talk a little bit about this in more detail.
Thank you, Paxton. Big one. All right. Yeah. All right. So, like I said, like Paxton said, we were talking about those import growths and how they affect the intermodal industry. So we wanted to break it down into the three main focus regions that we wanted to look into, and we found these are the key for the future of intermodal, and this is where the trends are showing. So we wanted to focus on the Midwest because of the influence of that Western Canadian freight coming in, and also the Southeast and the Northeast because of the increase of ports and the growth of those incoming freight in those regions. So to show you the growth and how consistent it is, we want to start with the Northeast. You can see it's fairly consistent growth between 2008 and 2016. We'll also focus on the Southeast, which has even more consistent growth, but also at a more extended rate. It does level off, we're going to get into that. And then with the Midwest, we see that being a hub area, and it's been utilized in the mineral industry, but that hub has been greater, has been utilized more and more over the years. And this is freight coming into those regions, because we figured that would be a best way to indicate the trends. All right, to break it down, the Midwest, again, it's that hub, and we saw almost a 50% growth of freight coming into the Midwest and utilizing that hub. So the top 3 regions that we see sending freight to the Midwest are coming from the Southwest, Western Canada, and the Northeast. The Northeast because of that port growth, and specifically West Canada because of those port growth. And our 4th was actually the Southeast, but it didn't make it into our top 3, though it is significant. This is the trend again. We show consistent growth, but from the Southwest, Southwest, it is the most volatile, and there's been significant. The darker blue you can see from West Canada has been quite significant. Southeast, we want to focus on that because we've had almost 100% growth in freight coming into that area, and because of an intermodal freight coming into that area, and then also the industry growth with things like New Detroit and the automotive industry and those factories being placed there. So the main influences on the Southeast is actually freight circulating within the Southeast, and we believe this is because of the increase in imports moving from that West Coast over to that Southeast and the industry increasing in that area. We see utilization of the hub coming in quite significant and creating that spike. The hub coming in and creating with the trading of goods from that hub, and then also coming in from the Northeast. And we'll get into this a little bit later, and we really want to focus on this triangle here with the partnerships and relationships between these different regions. And as you can see, the Southeast, region-to-region freight has grown quite substantially in the intermodal industry. But the other regions that we brought up, sending freight to the Southeast, are also consistent. They all level off. We'll get into that in just a second or in a couple minutes. And then the Northeast, we have freight coming in from the Midwest, again utilizing that freight. Southeast, and also with that increased imports, increased port volume, you see a lot of circulation within the region. And so the main point of this was that these are fairly consistent. Because this is a volume chart, it looks like freight coming from the Midwest is the largest player, but these are also significant but they're starting out from almost no volume and steadily increasing. And okay, in summary, we have a lot of freight coming into the Midwest, specifically influenced by Western Canada. And we've also seen a lot of freight coming in from those imports from the East Coast and circulating within those areas. And these are our top 6 region-to-region indicators. These are the ones that we saw the most spike in, and because of these spikes, we believe this is the region, or this is the area where the regions are growing and how we can forecast for future intermodal freight. They do level off, and we'll get into that right after Caitlin speaks. Oh, yeah, excuse me, this is the map that shows where our largest key indicators are. So these are our 6 top spikes in intermodal freight. To show you where that freight is coming from. It's coming from the West Coast. We see utilization of the hub, and we'll see a lot of transportation in the East.
So I'm going to talk about some of the influences that impacted these trends. Bigger is not always better. Megaships have proven to be too efficient. They've increased the industry fleet capacity faster than the rate of demand, and causing diminishing returns and lowering the ocean freight rates, eventually causing the Hanjin bankruptcy. And with the bankruptcy, it sped up a bunch of mergers between companies, which they decided instead of building bigger that they would pull capacity to keep up their service levels and to keep going. Anyways, this caused quite a few supply chain disruptions with the alliances, and because of antitrust laws, they could not break any kind of contract, and causing a lot of challenges inside the port, because freight coming into the port would end up in areas that needed to be somewhere else. And with the expanded canal, they could just reroute instead to the Gulf or East Coast to avoid these challenges, which leads us to transloading because it guards against that volatility. If there's too much going one place, they can take their time to redistribute it to area of shortages. While doing that, they can combine similar goods to go to the same location and differentiating weight to optimize containers. And of course, with additional handling, this is going to increase costs and complications within the supply chain because you're required more planning and more communication, and as the system goes on, communication gets skewed, and you're not always sure where it's supposed to go afterwards. Which, in a backdraw to translating for rail, is that it's multimodal, meaning it could go by truck or rail. Which brings us to the road competition. They have the available capacity to provide these services that the trains may not need. They can offer multiple solutions. They can service any region, any port at a moment's notice, going from the port directly to the customer, making it faster.
Thank you, Caitlin. And just real quick, we want to touch on container trends. As you go, I want you to focus on the light blue, which are 53s, and the red, which are 40s. And we want to show you, this is 2007, we want to show you how the market is being dominated with those assets of 53s. As you can see, quite consistently, the push of 53s and 40s across the entire intermodal market. And then we're going to get into those changes I mentioned, earlier with the leveling off. So all of our key region-to-region indicators or links that we were discussing, they all had strong recovery from 2008. They all showed consistent growth from 2009 to 2015, but then they all leveled off in 2016. So we wanted to dive in and try to figure out what happened there, and these are our findings. We believe that diesel prices played a major key in this because of after the contracts were through and companies were looking maybe to switch their contracts to a lower consistent price, and after companies got more comfortable with the lower diesel prices and it not just being a spike and then they have to go back. We believe that diesel prices will stay low for the next year or so, and so they were betting on that movement of freight. Political climate with the 2016 election, but also things like Brexit affecting the global economy, whether companies should invest, if they're holding on to their assets and waiting for policy changes or regulations, so they're playing with their cards close to the chest. And so we see not as much growth in industry. And port congestion and rerouting. This has to do with that east port, or the concentration of ships going to the east port. When people importing stuff are choosing new freight, they don't have the partnerships, or then they don't have maybe the structure of the old ports or the old systems they would use. So they're transporting new ports where they don't have those relationships, and so they choose motor carriers because it's easy, cheap, and they don't need to form that partnership all over again. So you utilize some things like 3PLs and asset-based carriers. And now I'm going to pass it off to Jared, who's going to talk about other factors we consider before making our recommendation.
Thank you, Dan. So some other factors that we consider a little bit least important, but still important to consider, sustainability and risk. So digging into sustainability, we think it's going to be interesting for the intermodal sector moving forward. Emissions standards and the facilities and all the equipment that's being used, and also the corporate social responsibility side. So locomotives, cranes, trucks, all of those things together, Tier 4 regulations and other emissions regulations are going to be very important moving forward, we believe. Here you will see the FEC Railway locally has switched their locomotives over to run on LPG, and this is kind of an industry mover, and it'll be we believe this technology will be important moving forward. Also corporate social responsibility, again, it's been an increased strategic focus of organizations to move to this environmentally friendly LPG trucks. I believe it's Freightliner that had a partnership with Saddle Creek Logistics in Florida as well to create these fleets. And looking at risk, interruptions are always an important consideration. Port strikes, derailments, other factors to be considered. If the port doesn't work, freight can't move, and the same thing on derailment. And along with derailments, it may not be my train, but I'm 5 trains behind it, and so on and so forth. So the overall network fluidity is what's important there. Commodity prices of coal and oil, again, coal, especially on the railroad, will influence if if coal does come back, then that cargo and network velocity will slow down as well as go. And then political changes with the new administration. This will be interesting moving forward. Trump is, despite campaigning on improvements, it's been interesting to see some cuts he's recommended. And 27 and beyond, current concerns, we identified traffic pattern of trucking competition and imports, and then the solutions we have moving forward to move this traffic on the rail. These are network velocity, partnerships, and then technology and innovation. So looking at the railroad networks, here we chose to choose 3 core networks we believe painted the biggest picture. There are 7 Class 1 railroads, but we thought these were the most important. So as Vince and Rep suggested earlier with the movement of the traffic, it's been interesting to see CN's network up here from Prince River to Chicago and what they're coining the Western Corridor. So it's been interesting to see them move more traffic over this area. As well, domestically, the BNSF, with their Northern Transcon and their Southern Transcon, both feeding into Chicago, and the CapEx expenditure commitments they've made to this as well. Moving over to the East Coast, as has been said, this triangle of traffic is also a commitment that's been made by CSX, what they're coining the railroad of tomorrow. They have these core corridors to compete with the trucks, and they're investing significantly here, everything from sidings to lengthening, creating new sidings in order to keep that traffic moving. We also believe technology is going to continue to be important, and these are 4 core areas we identified within the intermodal sector: appointment scheduling, mobile application technology, PTC, and lift optimization. The appointment scheduling is becoming increasingly important in the ports to be able to move these assets through quicker and get the truckers in and out as soon as possible. And these two coincide with mobile application technology. Throughout some of our research, we were able to find BNSF's Rail Pass app, which is reduced well within the terminal as much as 20 minutes per driver. Both the drivers, the customers, and everybody working in this relationship is very happy with it. And PTC is also an interesting consideration. Although mandated by the federal government, these safety improvements on these networks should be significant. And then lift optimization as well is always important, to be continually moving that asset as many times as possible. Partnerships, we believe, is also another core competency moving forward. This will be through transparency, growth preparation, dwell reduction, and innovation. So transparency between organizations has become increasingly important to work together and move the cargo faster, as well as growth preparation. In 2016, with the shift to the East Coast shipment move, with the shift to the East Coast, they were not prepared for the growth at the port level. So this is through drayage, not drayage. We'll move on to dwell reduction. Dwell reduction is becoming increasingly important to, again, optimize these assets and get them in and out of the terminal as fast as possible. And then as well as innovation, it's important to embrace, encourage, and bring in the next generation of leaders to continue to move the industry forward. And then looking forward, driver shortage is a big concern, and then also at the end of this year, the ELD mandate will be taking into effect. And we believe that this will significantly change capacity. Now Vince is going to move on to the forecast.
All right, so we drove a forecast model for the next few years, 2017 to 2018. And with the suggestions that we made, we believe that this is a fairly accurate model. We used a 95% confidence interval, additive trend forecasting model in Tableau. And we found that the Southwest will level off, and that the other 6 regions that we identified will continue to grow at a consistent level. The Southwest will continue to will level off due to the influence of the Northeast freight and the West Canada freight coming into that hub. And as you can see here, this is our confidence interval with the shaded region, and that shows the likelihood within the 95% confidence interval. We believe that those solutions that we talked about, this is a fairly accurate forecast. And then so, again, we broke it down to imports, our regional growth, the other trend in 2016, and we believe that these can be combated with the technology adoption, increased utilization of partnerships, and the network velocity across the different, combined with those partnerships across railways.
So, in the video behind me, in conclusion, you're going to see a functioning port with the assets moving consistently, moving constantly, and successfully. We believe that what we presented to you today will be important to continue to see this happening all the time, every time, and successfully. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take your questions.
Yes.
So I guess your supporting documentation here is all of your data analysis that you're.
Yes, that's just a compliment.
This is your backup data, okay.
Just as a visual, there was, we didn't want to follow along with it, but it was just supporting facts.
Sure.
And there are other things to give you a look at.
So just to recap here, if I look at the introduction of the case, the question that Joni Casey is asking is, why is this happening? Import volumes are up, but international containers moving on rail are down. What are the root causes? So just summarize for me what you think are the root causes. That's the core question of the case.
I think there's just multiple factors that are coming in. It's the fact that the Panama Canal is expanding. Everything, some major ports on the East Coast are dredging to keep up with the ships, while the East Coast is sometimes easier to function with, or like instead of like sending it rail from West Coast to East Coast, it's easier to go to the Panama Canal, which cuts down 50 miles to the East Coast or Gulf, which makes it a shorter distance and tends just to make it a little bit easier.
And competitive competition from trucking companies with those diesel prices and the changes in the ports and the movement of those assets around. They don't have those partnerships in those areas and don't have that structure in those areas. And so they're changing quickly, and motor carriers are the quick and fast option.
Along with that, I would also say the slowdowns that occurred while the railroads had excess capacity and service levels dropped extremely low. I believe they were below 80% at some point. So trying to get those networks back in shape to try to bring it back. It's like, I don't trust you from that low level. I want you back, sort of thing.
Also in 2015, the port strikes almost shut down 29 ports, which caused huge congestion. And in order to deal with that, they would either fly by they could fly by plane, or they would have to reroute, and the quickest option would probably be truck.
So when you, the data that you presented about the flows, and it was quite detailed, help me understand how that data is helping answer the question.
So the main two features that you could look at would be the dense circulation of intermodal freight in the southeast region and in the northeast region. So before, that freight would probably come into a southwestern port and then be shipped via intermodal to get to that southeast terminus and the northeast terminus. But when those ports are congested, the Panama Canal factor, and we're rerouting to northeast ports and southeast ports, and those are growing, then the stop is much shorter. So because you're carrying more miles on maritime, then you have a shorter point to point to get to the end customer than if that, as we mentioned, that railroad network isn't set up in some of those smaller ports that have shown a lot of growth, then a truck is going to be the best option.
I think, great data, great, I think you guys are on it. You said a lot of the right things. I think you're perceptive of what you're seeing out there. And I think to Lawrence's question, it would have been good to, I think you identified the question in the front, that you've got so many slides, so much data, and what we're trying to do is correlate what all is that. Okay, so what's the final? So I think just maybe a one slide recap at the end saying, okay, here was the question, here's what Joni was asking. Look, we seem to decline in intermodal. We're interested in intermodal, so we do. Why is it happening? So you've identified some causes. I think the labor shortages, I think the truckers issue, I think the political is absolutely right. In my industry, every 4 years when there's an election, we have a big dip 6 months before. This happens as a fact, it's sustainable, and you can go back in history and see it. So that might have been part of it. So then if you identify those things, and then I think your next thing, what you're kind of going to is, hey, look, these are other things we're seeing, what we ought to do. That to me would have been a recommendation on the end. So here, what caused it? Here's what we think caused it. Here's what the data shows. And then, do we have to worry about it continuing? Or should we make some changes? And that to me would have been really good.
So, as just a brief mention to that, the ELD mandate paired with the driver shortage, in the short run, unless the motor carrier industry is revised to make more regional jobs and make more local jobs, then we are anticipating a increase in the use of intermodal when that trucking capacity shrinks. Because the bulk of trucking, as you know, owner-operators, not just the big firms. So,
Right, but most of the big carriers already have them. and have
exactly, so
them.
they're not the ones that
So
are.
it's the smaller, but you're right, it will, when everybody has to be honest and operate legally, there's gonna be less capacity. But I'm not sure a lot of those guys are what's hauling this business anyway, and hauling other things, so I'm not sure. But there will be a tightening, there's no question.
I think, just to go off that, with, in terms of the entire picture, changes are happening within this industry. New ports are having more volume. So when these people that are importing things, they have to make a new decision on how they're going to get their port inland, and they're not choosing intermodal as much. And we believe that is because of the things Jared was talking about with trust and the service level of the path. So they're, and with the port congestion, they're choosing other carriers and other lanes. And so it can be redeemed with the service level increase, the technology, and building back those relationships.
You identified it great, but I think, the question was, is this, okay, what happened? All right, they had to do something with freight, ports flows, we moved it out. Is it gonna continue to stay? Are they gonna continue to send them to these small ports? Or is that just a temporary thing? Because I think that's what they're trying to assess, is what happened, why, and going forward, is this what it's going to be?
I think it's gonna increase, as in that more ports and options are getting more competitive. People have been stuck to one route a lot of the times, and with contracts going up and changing political climates and even changing demographics of like where goods go or like where transportation is needed is changing. And so like people can even send from the Suez Canal instead of Panama, and now would go to the East Coast. They're just finding different ways, and especially with the congestion on the West Coast and like so many port strikes that we almost lost $1 billion a day due to those port strikes in 2015, that maybe it's just easier to take a few more miles and do shorter routes with the Gulf or East Coast.
Was there any research done or any knowledge of what the railroads are doing in terms of capital investments in the facilities?
Yeah,
East Coast versus West Coast, CSX versus NS kind of thing?
Yeah, I know BNSF definitely committed a lot to that Southern Transcon route. The East Coast, again, CSX, lengthening sidings, building new sidings. I think specifically was mentioned the Jacksonville to Chicago route in order to run longer trains faster, keep everything moving.
But is there an increase in number of facilities that they're building?
Yeah, there was also mention of some more localized, smaller terminals. I think, I don't remember the specific towns, but there was some 40-acre sites and some smaller focus on that more localized container type network.
This was your transloading section. Help me understand, do you think transloading is becoming more important or less important?
I would say it depends on how big you are on cost. Because I think transloading is very important because it's an opportunity to regroup yourself coming from the port, especially when it's congested and trying to get there. And so like, sorry, I'm trying.
No worries.
It's just with the very demand and like needing to send things from place to place. Like the cross-decking, yes, it can take longer, but it can also help you come with like last minute solutions if something were to fail. And so I do think it's going to increase on the West Coast because it kind of filters it out.
Especially with that one graph showing the increase in 53-foot trailers between 2007 and 2016 is showing that trend happening today. So.
And what I failed to mention is that it also really helps with ocean containers. Instead of like, they can just take the container to the transloading facility, transfer it to another container that is theirs, and go. This is going to reduce how many West Coast containers that we have in the Midwest that we have no way to get back.
So I would just make a comment on the 53s.
Mm-hmm.
that's one possible explanation as to why the 53s are increasing. Another one, because they're also used for pure domestic movements, right? So if
Yes.
domestic's growing faster than international, that would also tend to make that happen. So I'm not saying you're incorrect, I'm just saying I don't think you can draw that conclusion just from that one piece of data. You know, there were multiple things going on here at the same time. And so, you know, you've got to draw from the different straws to sort of reach your conclusion. Time's up?
Okay.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
Good job. Don't worry, trust me.